Every year, about 9 million people walk into the Louvre. Most of them are here for one thing. They queue. They push to the front. They lift a phone over the heads in front of them, and they look at it for about 15 seconds. 15 seconds. That's the Louvre's own figure. People cross the planet, wait 2 hours in a marble corridor, and give the most famous face in history about as long as a red light. A small painting, 30 inches tall, behind thick bulletproof glass in a sealed climate-controlled case. It is, by reputation, the most valuable object in that building, probably the most valuable painting on Earth. And here is the part nobody says out loud. Not one person in that room could buy it. Not for $1 million, not for $1 billion, not the richest human alive. Because on paper, on the actual books of the French state, this painting is worth nothing at all. Let's be precise about what we're looking at. A single plank of poplar wood, painted a little over 500 years ago by a man who never quite finished it and carried it around for the rest of his life. No signature, no date, no title even. Mona Lisa is a nickname that stuck. Today it sits in its own climate-controlled box, watched by more cameras than most banks, in the most visited room in the most visited museum on Earth. To move it, the French government has to be involved. To photograph it for profit, lawyers get involved. For an object with no price tag, an astonishing number of people are paid to protect it. Which raises a simple question. If it's the most valuable painting in the world, who decided that, and how? The answer starts with the day it went missing. On a Monday in August 1911, the day the Louvre was closed to the public, a man walked in wearing a workman's smock, lifted the painting off 4 iron hooks, tucked it under his coat, and walked out. It took the museum more than a day to even notice the wall was empty. A painter came to sketch in the gallery, found a bare space where the most famous picture in France should be, and asked a guard. The guard assumed it was off being photographed. His name was Vincenzo Peruggia. He was a handyman who had actually built protective cases for the museum, including for this painting. And for 2 years, the most wanted picture in the world sat in a trunk in his boarding house room, under a false bottom, a few streets from the police looking for it. The theft didn't lower the painting's value. It created it. Before 1911, the Mona Lisa was a respected old master, one of thousands. Then the empty wall hit every front page on the planet. People queued to look at the space where it had hung. At nothing. At 4 hooks and a rectangle of clean wallpaper. By the time it came back, it wasn't a painting anymore. It was the painting. The world had fallen in love with it the moment it was gone, which tells you something uncomfortable. The price was never really about the paint. 50 years later, someone finally put a figure on it. 1962, France agreed to lend the Mona Lisa to the United States. A diplomatic favor, Queen of the Louvre crossing the Atlantic on an ocean liner. Before it sailed, it had to be valued for the paperwork. The number they wrote down was $100 million. In 1962. That's somewhere north of $1 billion today. It went straight into the record books as the highest insurance valuation ever given to a painting. Except, and this is the detail I love, France never actually bought the insurance. Someone did the math. The premium on a $100 million policy was so enormous that the French decided it was cheaper to spend the money on soldiers, alarms, and a very good safe than to hand it to an insurance company. So the most valuable object on Earth crossed the ocean uninsured. If it had gone down with the ship, no one would have paid out a cent. France simply bet $1 billion on locks, and won. They shipped it to Washington, then to New York, and in 1 month at the Met, over 1 million people came to see it. 1,077,521 to be exact. $1 billion painting, no insurance, and a queue around the block. So far, the story makes sense. Expensive things are expensive. Then you try to actually sell it, and the whole thing falls apart. Because you can't sell the Mona Lisa. Not shouldn't, can't. It is against French law. The painting belongs to the national collection, and objects in that collection are what the law calls inalienable. They cannot be sold, cannot be given away, cannot be seized for a debt. Not by a museum director, not by a minister, not by the president. If France went bankrupt tomorrow, creditors could take the buildings, the land, the gold, and they still could not touch the painting on that wall. And that quietly breaks the whole idea of what it's worth. Because worth, market worth, needs a buyer and a seller who are actually allowed to shake hands. A house is worth what someone will pay for it. A painting is worth what it fetches at auction. The Mona Lisa can never go to auction. There is no buyer because there can be no sale. So there is no price. And no price doesn't mean infinite. In accounting, it means the one thing nobody wants to hear about the most famous painting in the world. Let's do the autopsy. Treat it like any other asset and read the books. Can you sell it? No. Can you borrow against it? Use it as collateral for a loan? No. A bank can only lend against something it could seize and sell, and it can never seize this. Does it earn money on its own? Not directly. The Louvre doesn't charge extra to stand in front of it. Your ticket is the same whether you see it or not. So on the balance sheet of the French state, the most valuable painting on earth isn't priced at all. Heritage like this is carried at a symbolic value, a token, €1, or simply kept off the books entirely. The most famous face in history, filed under the same value as a paperclip. Not because it's worthless, because it's priceless, in the oldest, most literal sense of that word. A thing with no price. Which leaves one genuinely strange question hanging in the air. If it earns nothing, can't be sold, and can't be borrowed against, why does France spend a fortune keeping it? Because the painting doesn't make money, it makes a crowd. The Louvre pulls in around 9 million visitors a year, and by the museum's own estimate, roughly 8 in 10 of them are walking through those doors for one painting. Take her off the wall, and you don't lose a painting. You lose the crowd, and the crowd is the business, tickets, memberships, the gift shop selling her face on umbrellas and fridge magnets and socks. An entire economy printed on one 16th century smile. France knows exactly what it's holding. That's why right now it is spending a fortune to build the painting its own room, a separate space, a dedicated entrance, so that the 9 million can flow past her without crushing each other. The government floated a figure of 700 to 800 million euros for the renovation. France's own public auditors looked at the plan and put the number closer to 1.15 billion. Over €1 billion. To build a better queue, for a painting worth nothing on the books. But even that isn't the strangest number in this story, because the most valuable thing the Mona Lisa produces isn't a ticket, it's a name. When Abu Dhabi wanted a world-class museum in the desert, it didn't just buy art, it bought the word Louvre. France agreed to lend the name for 30 years, and the price for the name alone was around 400 million euros, over $500 million at the time. Not the paintings, not the expertise, those were built on top and pushed the whole deal towards $1 billion. $500 million just for the word on the door. Sit with that for a second. The single most expensive thing in the Louvre isn't hanging on a wall. It's the name over the entrance. And that name, that magic in the word Louvre, was built, more than by anything else, by the one object inside it that can never be sold. So here is the autopsy result. The Mona Lisa is worth nothing, and that is precisely why she's worth everything. An asset you can sell has a price, and a price can always be beaten, cashed in, walked away from. An asset you can never sell has no price. It has a myth. And a myth doesn't sit on a balance sheet. It pulls 9 million people through a door every year and rents itself to the desert for a fortune. France doesn't own a painting. It owns the one thing it can never cash in, And for exactly that reason, the one thing it can never afford to lose. They valued her at $100 million and decided she was too expensive to insure. 60 years later, she's worth zero, and there isn't a policy on earth that could cover it.